Hello BookTube, I'm back with another June on the Range video, and this time it's for Zane Grey's Riders of the Purple Sage, which was published in 1912. And Zane Grey lived from 1872 to 1939. He wrote a lot of novels, mostly Western genre, idealizing the West. He was actually a dentist and turned writer, and this was one of his earlier big hits. He'd already written about 6 or 7 novels, but not all westerns up to this point. There were historical ones, Revolutionary War, and even sports, baseball novels as well. And this, I read this for Michael K. Vaughan's June on the Range, which was started last year. This is second year, and I'm a host again this year for it, reading a celebration of Westerns. And this year, Michael had sort of added in a couple possibilities to read a Louis L'Amour and read a Zane Grey. And this was my Zane Grey. It's a reread. I read this probably 40 years ago or longer. And it's basically, it's longer than a lot of Westerns. It's about 350 pages in this mass market paperback. And it's set in, it says on the back here, it's 1871. It's in Utah, and it's a place, Cottonwoods. And there's a ranch run by Jane Weatherstein. She sort of has inherited this massive ranch with lots of cattle and lots of riders, basically cowboys who look after the cattle. But she's a Mormon, and it's part of a Mormon community. But she does not want to follow their dictates, especially of who she's supposed to marry. And in rides a stranger called Lassiter. He's a gunman. He's looking for his sister, or at least the grave of his sister, and to avenge her death. And also finding out anything about his niece, which her daughter. Now, it's a very interesting novel. I think so anyway. But it's got the usual sort of, I don't like using tropes, but usual sort of storyline. Stranger comes in, helps someone out. And because he stumbles in at a time where there was another young guy, Venters, who the elders were going to basically pass judgment on him because he's helping Jane as well. And he stops this. Lassiter stops this. And so he gets the backup of the elders and the deacon and the religious leaders. And it's not a very good picture of Mormons, but it's the control of especially women, and saying that they must conform to and marry who they say, and basically it's to bolster their own power and land, especially because she's a huge landowner, because she has inherited this from her father. Now, Venters, at the same time, they're trying to break her, forcing her to acquiesce to their demands, without doing too much forceful violence or anything against her. But they're making sure that her cattle disappear, that are being rustled. And Venters goes out looking for what's happened to a huge herd of cattle, and he knows that there is a cattle rustler called Oldring that is working in the area, and that there's a bunch of canyons and little valleys that are secluded, that he's probably hiding the cattle in, and there's a whole sort of network of what's probably happening here with the cattle rustlers and where the cattle are going, and with the rustlers themselves. But there's also a masked rider, a mysterious masked rider, and a rider in this case, like the riders, the Purple Sage, are basically cowboys. They ride the range, uh, and well, the sage, and looking after the cattle. Lassiter stays on and does this because he wants to know more about what's happening. Jane, he starts falling in love with Jane. Jane doesn't want to tell him who was the person who brought his sister to the town, to the area, because she knows that he'll go out and kill him, and she does not want any more bloodshed. But Venters, while he's searching for the cattle, for Jane's cattle, he comes across the masked rider and a companion. He shoots and kills the companion, but he wounds the masked rider, and he realizes he hasn't killed the masked rider. But then he finds out that it's a young girl. So he's very remorseful for this, and he tries to save her. He does save her, but he needs to get somewhere where he can't move her too far. But because he knows he'll be, the dead guy will be found, their horses and so forth. So they'll be looking for him. So he finds this little canyon, this little valley that's very secluded. There's one way in, and it looked like it was the home of rock dwellers, hundreds and hundreds of years previously, who lived in rock shelters and rock houses, like on the cliffs. And there's one entrance in, and it's set up like with a bit of a booby trap, with a large rock that it can be pushed, and then it would seal the entrance and seal them off inside. So he figures, well, if he has to do that, he'll do that, because he falls in love with the young woman, and she realizes that he had shot her, but it's a new life for her, and she's away from the rustlers, and she likes that. But he finds out, he thinks that this old ring, that the head of the rustlers, is one that has sort of kidnapped her at some point and forced her to be sort of his concubine or companion or whatever. And he doesn't like this, so he actually confronts him eventually and kills him. But then he finds out that it's her father, or she thinks that, he's been told that she's been told that he's her father. It's a bit of a complicated story. You find some revelations of who she actually is, and like I say, it's not a very pretty picture of how they describe the Mennonite community and their control over people and their community. And I really enjoyed this. I think it's a very well written novel to a certain extent. Zane Grey is a much, much better prose writer than Louis L'Amour. Much, much better. It doesn't have the sloppy aspects of Louis L'Amour, if I'm comparing, in which I am, because the previous book that I read was Louis L'Amour, and then this is Zane Grey. There are some things that, like the relationship aspects, are a little stereotypical, or a little, I don't know what the word is, soap opera-y a little bit, I guess. And the dialogue sometimes when between a male and female is happening, and it's a sort of romantic conversation, he doesn't do that well. It's a little off. It doesn't ring true. But there's as I say, it's an intricate story. It's not just simple storyline. There's a lot of things that are you can guess, and then you get there's reveals throughout of things which are, and there's a bit of action in places. It's not constant action. It's more character driven than, say, Louis L'Amour and a lot of other other westerns, rather than action orientated. Even though there still is a lot of action in here, and it ends quite interestingly. How the ending is. But as I say, it's just really really good. And I remember as a kid, my dad used to like Zane Grey, and I'd read maybe half a dozen of his books, and I knew I read this one, and I'd have to look closely at the titles of the others because I don't quite remember, because I was fairly young when I read them, and all I remember is that I enjoyed them. Um, and while I was reading this, I didn't remember the whole storyline, but I remembered it's weird how certain scenes will stick into your mind, and the scenes of the rock dwellers that they find sort of stuck in my mind, where he finds some pottery, and also the stone that sort of been carved and waiting to be rolled, and after rereading this, I was sort of thinking, well, did Spielberg and Lucas sort of, think of this as well? Like, there's all sorts of little things that are with Indiana Jones, and there's an interesting, like, there's little bits in it, but I know there's lots of there's so much other stuff in other pulp type fiction that has Rolling Stones and stuff like that. But anyway, that was sort of what was conjuring to mind, and I was wondering if one of them had read this, and used some aspects of that thing. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to actually reading more Zane Grey, and if you've read this, let me know, because it's one of his most popular ones. It's the most well known book that he has, and it's the one that I remember specifically, title wise, that I had read. So I thought, okay, now I've got to reread that because I know I've got a number of other of his books, but I'm not 100% sure if I've read any of those. But as I say, this one I did, and as I say, they're not somewhat spoilers what I've said, but I didn't spoil everything, so it's well worth reading. Because as I say, I didn't give the reveals and all this kind of stuff, like all the reveals. So yeah, Zane Grey, Riders of the Purple Sage. I'll see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.